Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we are going to discuss book three. That's two. Book three in Gordon Corman's original series, Titanic. So this third book is SOS. Came out September 2011. Yes, 166 pages, just like the last book. So this starts off. Hang on one second. Monday, April 15th, 1912, 12:15 a.m. And we end off. Where's my last chapter? We get a slight time jump. Tuesday, May 14th, 1912, 10:45 a.m. I've said numerous times how much I love this series. First off, how Gordon actually writes. It's very descriptive. It plays on all your senses, sight, touch, smell. It's just very neat. And the sound that he describes, it's just very neat how he writes. And you can actually feel and see. It's just so cool. So the film, it feels like you're watching a film. The series is just so quick, and we have our four main characters: Alfie, Patty, Juliana, and Sophie. The Titanic is sinking. So what happens, right? But it's also not a matter of just their story. It's what's happening on the ship, what's happening down below with Alfie and his father, with the coal guys, the black gang as they're called because they're covered in the soot. What happens with keeping the burners going, what happens when the water overflows into one compartment, into the next, etc. What happens when the ship breaks, what happens when there's not enough lifeboats, what happens when there's collapsible boats that are barely floating because of air pockets underneath, what happens when the chief baker is just plastered out of his mind, filled with whiskey, but he stayed in the water for over 2.5 hours and he's fine. It's just so interesting. It's interesting seeing these historical people, right, who didn't choose to be historical people, but these actual real life individuals having their stories shared through a fictitious aspect within other aspects of bringing Jack the Ripper aboard. What happens when Alfie and Jack have that final battle with a macaroon jar or a bonbon jar, and then he drowns in the Atlantic, and he can tell his mother that she can sleep well at night knowing that Jack the Ripper is now off the streets, not causing chaos now in New York. So it's just interesting with the aftermath of the ship, how the four of them got off the ship: Juliana, Alfie, Sophie, and Patty, in their own separate ways. Patty then releases, Kevin Kahuli and Seamus the henchman from jail because he can't let them die like rats in a bucket kind of a thing, because he has a heart, even though they tried to murder him. It's very interesting. But then having that Alfie transition into passing away, it was just such a wild experience reading it. Having the hypothermia conversations, having the cold feels like hot conversations within regards to the sinking, having the other conversations of what's happening with the other ships surrounding, what's happening with that one ship, the Californian, who's 10 miles away and who's not responding to anything, what happens with the Carpathia, who's like 50 miles away, who's speeding as fast as they can through the ice patches to get to the last known coordinates of the Titanic. So it's very interesting having the different stories from the different individuals on those ships played out within this story. It's very interesting that it's not just a four main charactered kind of story, that you have all these other characters. You have these high political figure characters stories. You have these steerage third class folk trying to get a better life in America stories. So things, right? It touches on real topics, and it's really neat having this within such a descriptive mindset. And it's so quick. It's not boring. It's not too overly graphic in regards to the horror aspect of watching 1,500 people die. It touches on real life events, obviously, but it touches on the humanity aspect of real life events. What's the greater cause, the we not me aspect, and obviously there are different laws now than there was then in regards to making sure everybody has a place on a lifeboat if/when another ship sinks. So it's really neat having these real life aspects, but then watching the character development, Sophie saving her mother, and then them having to start life again in Boston when they get to New York. Juliana, whose father passes away, so she's no longer any form of royalty. She's now still a lady, but the title of the earldom is now to a distant cousin. But now she's adopting this 2-year-old orphan from the Titanic sinking. Alfie passes away. What happens next? We then have Patty sneaking away on another boat to have his own life, or trying to have his own life again in New York. where there's jobs aplenty at that particular time period. But then the Gahulis, track him down again and then reveal that Daniel was never dead, that they just beat him and they took him in as this lowly forced worker, if you will. And the fact that Patty saved Kevin and Seamus, Kevin's brother, head of Belfast, if you will, gangster wise, wants to repay Patty for saving his brother's life. So he gives him money, but then also gives him back Daniel. So Daniel and Patty are now in New York. And then what happens next? So Patty says, Daniel's going to school, and don't worry about me. I'm a survivor. You know, I'll figure it out. But it's just neat having that reconnection the last 3 pages, because Patty thought he was dead and Daniel thought he was dead. So to have them both reconnected just as they were together again in the beginning of the books, it's just really cool. It's a great way to end it. I really wish that there was a sequel aspect to it, but that didn't happen. I just love the character development. I love the way this story was told. I love the historical fiction aspect of it. I love how it touched on real topics. I love how Gordon writes. I loved everything about this book, and I loved everything about this book series when I first read it back in 2011, way back in the day, 12 years ago. So, Titanic, Book 3, SOS, Gordon Corman's original series. Wonderful. Beautiful. On to the next review. Mucho mahalo.